Okay? So, our topic today will be on the culture war and the Christian. Now, looks like the slides have gone out again. Okay, yes. So, unless you have been living under a rock, you would know that the culture that we are living in, whether it is in Singapore or what has been going on in the West, it is a culture that has grown increasingly anti-Christian. Okay? We see, of course, the rise of the LGBT movement. We see sexual licentiousness, abortion, and various other movements inimical to the Christian faith. Right? There is a rejection, a blanket rejection of Christian sexual ethics and metaphysical claims. And in engagement on these issues, any sort of argument that smells even faintly of religion, or the Christian religion, is dismissed out of hand as a religious argument. Okay? Now, looking at this conflict, right, we might say, okay, some might say that that is because we have come to a post-Christian age. We have come to a secular age where it is not religion that rules in the public square. Okay? We have a secular public square, right? And any form of public discourse, right, has to proceed from some sort of non-religious common ground. Okay? And so that is why we see what we have today, okay? Where marriage and sexuality and all that doesn't proceed from Christian assumptions and Christian worldview. Okay? Are these cultural changes really a result of religious neutrality? Okay, that was the initial claim. The initial claim of political liberalism. Okay, the supposed neutrality of political liberal philosophy, okay, was that, okay, y'all can't see it, but just listen to me. Okay, was that they proceed out of principles that are neutral as between controversial conceptions of what makes for a valuable or morally worthy way of life. Okay? I repeat again. Right? Principles that are neutral as between controversial conceptions of what makes for a valuable or morally worthy way of life. Right? What is good? What is right? Right? What are the matters of ultimate concern? Right? Political liberalism says that, we have to be neutral with regard to that, and then we proceed from this neutrality and we get to where we are. Okay? Now, what I mentioned earlier, okay, the things that you have to be neutral as between competing conceptions of what makes for a valuable way of life, these things are typically areas associated with religion. Right? Religion is what we think of when it tells you what is the ultimate good and where's the source of meaning and all that. Okay, so that is the That is the supposed premise that, that the political liberalism proceeded on, right, to be neutral with respect to religion. But people, right, who have really looked at these arguments, and commentators, not just from the political right, they have noticed, okay, this is a quote from Robert George, okay, a professor, and in his foreword in the book, okay, that I am drawing heavily from, okay, he says, liberalism was unavoidably built on premises into which had been smuggled controversial substantive ideas about human nature, the human good, human dignity, and indeed, human destiny. Ideas that competed with those proposed by alternative religious and secular so-called comprehensive views. In other words, liberalism was not truly neutral. Liberalism held up over against Christianity its own conceptions of what is valuable, of what is morally worthy, of what gives meaning. And so this cultural conflict is not truly about secularism versus religion. And if you look at the things that have happened, the discourse and the rhetoric that flies, not just from one side to the other, or from both sides, okay, they seem to take on a very religious nature. Okay? When you peel apart their arguments, look into their premises, you find that they are based on competing claims on what is the ultimate good. They are based on competing claims of what human nature is, competing claims on moral authority. And the framing of this conflict as religion versus secular completely misses its nature. Okay, Stephen Smith writes in his book, Pagans and Christians in the City, okay, this so-called secular versus religious framework increasingly seems inadequate. That is because the parties and factions on all sides of the culture wars exhibit qualities standardly associated with religion: an uncompromising zeal or passion, a tendency to view issues in good versus evil or light versus darkness terms, an eagerness to demonize opponents. So, the nature of this conflict is not non-religious versus religious. It is really one religion against another, or other religions. Okay? It is at root a religious conflict. And if the nature of this conflict is religious, what is this religion that stands against Christianity? What is this religion that stands against Christianity, if it could be said to be one religion? The English poet T.S. Eliot, who was himself a Christian, said that the choice before us, okay, he said this in a lecture called The Idea of a Christian Society, the choice before us is between the formation of a new Christian culture and the acceptance of a pagan one. The acceptance of a pagan society. Pagan? Really? Pagan? Eliot, are you sure? Are we going to see temples to Zeus and Apollo set up in the city square? Are we going to sacrifice bulls to these gods for fertility and for rain, right? Are we going to pray to Mars before we go to war? Of course, if that was what Eliot really meant, then that ridicule and questioning may have been warranted. But this idea of a resurgent paganism was ridiculed even by C.S. Lewis, who, of all people, we would think would not take things literally. Yeah. In what sense, then, did Eliot talk about paganism? The paganism of the classical Greek and Roman past has well and truly been defeated. Well, actually, we see the rise of neo-pagans today who want to worship the old gods, and they have Norse paganism also. But we see that classical paganism, okay, in its full form, has been defeated, and it's not coming back. It is not coming back. But in what sense, right, is modern society becoming pagan, as Eliot put it? Right. What exactly is paganism, right, separate from the actual forms that it took on in the classical era? Okay? And it's only in its classical expression that paganism has been defeated. Okay? Let's work towards a characterization of paganism. Okay? What do you think of when you think of the paganism of ancient Greek and Rome? Right? Or even the pagan gods of the ancient Near East that the Israelites were drawn into worshipping. Okay? It was seemingly characterized by polytheism. Polytheism meaning there's many gods. Okay? Who were all the gods in the Old Testament that you can think of? Baal, Ashtoreth, Molech. Okay? These many gods you see in the Old Testament. Okay? And the Greeks and the Romans had their pantheon too. Zeus, Apollo, Artemis, Mars, okay? Dionysius. And how did the people relate? How did the pagans relate to these gods? Okay? One thing that we can think of, right, is that the favor was won by appeasing the gods. Okay? We sacrifice this to appease the god. Okay? And the god will give us these good things. On the other hand, we offend the gods. We refuse to sacrifice to them. We refuse, right, to offer tribute and worship to them. We will bring calamity upon us. The offended god, right, will send all forms of woe and ill upon us. And we see this thinking in the Bible. In the days of Jeremiah, in Jeremiah chapter 44, verses 17 to 18, these are people who are telling Jeremiah, "But we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes, in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil. But since we left off to burn incense to the Queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted, lacked all things, and have been consumed by the sword and by the famine." That was the Israelites in Jeremiah's day, he was saying, no, we have to pray to the Queen of Heaven, because when we did that, we had everything, We had the rain, we had a bountiful harvest, we had food, we had clothes to wear, we had peace. But when we stopped doing that, right, all sorts of horrible things happened to us because we did not burn incense to the Queen of Heaven. That is part of pagan worship, a pagan relation to the gods. Okay? In the Greek world, you had that too. Okay? In the first book of Homer's Iliad, okay, the context is that the Greek army, okay, had conquered and won some conquests. Okay? And among the spoils of conquest were women, virgins, beautiful women. Okay? And Agamemnon, the king, had taken Chryseis, the daughter of a priest of Apollo, from that place that they had just won a war against. Right? And that priest of Apollo came to Agamemnon begging for his daughter to be released back to him, even willing to pay a very huge ransom. But Agamemnon told him to buzz off. Okay? And so that priest went back and prayed to Apollo to avenge, right, him. And the Greek army is hit with a pestilence and many die. And they're all gathering and they're just like, what are we to do? And this wise man says to the king, okay, encouraged thus, the blameless man replies, nor vows unpaid, nor slighted sacrifice, but he, our chief, provoked the raging pest, Apollo's vengeance for his injured priest. Nor will the gods' awakened fury cease, but plagues shall spread and funeral fires increase, till the great king, without a ransom paid, to her own Chrysa send the black-eyed maid. Perhaps with added sacrifice and prayer, the priest may pardon and the god may spare. Well, they do in fact do that, and they are spared further pestilence from Apollo. Okay? So this is a part of the ancient paganism, classical paganism. Okay? Polytheism, gods. We have to appease them. If not, we get all sorts of terrible calamity fall upon us. Okay? Another dimension of ancient paganism was its civic and public nature. Okay? Among the ancient Greek city-states in the classical era, their pagan religion was very much civic in nature. It was tied to the state. Honor of the gods is seen as essential for the state. If someone commits sacrilege, okay, that is seen as treasonous. Prominent citizens in the Greek city-states, very rich aristocrats or those among the political elite, they were expected to sponsor religious processions and festivals, and this was part of their civic duty. Okay? Religion and the state was so closely tied. Okay? We think today of separation of church and state. That is actually a uniquely Christian idea. If you had told someone in the classical world, the state should be separate from religion, they will look at you with incredulity, because what you said is just completely absurd to them. That's like saying the blood should be separate from the body, the head should be separate from the body. That is how closely religion was tied to the state in ancient paganism. Okay. Likewise, for the Romans also believed that their republic and subsequently their empire, okay, was maintained through their piety, okay, through their piety to the gods. And if you look at the Roman writers in those days, and they talk about why their state is so great, why their republic is so great and so powerful and above all other nations around. They say it's because of our piety, of our honoring the gods. All of them in the ancient world agreed the Romans were the most religious people. And if you remember in the church history lessons, the context for Augustine writing The City of God was that in the year 410, Rome was sacked by barbarians. Okay? So in the year 410, Christianity had already been quite popular in Rome. Okay, that was already after the time of Constantine. But there was still a lot of people who clung to the old ways, to the old pagan ways. And when Rome was sacked in 410, people were blaming the Christians. Right? They were saying that it is because of these Christians, okay, we have not been honoring the old gods, honoring our gods, and that's why calamity falls upon us. That's why the gods are angry. And that's why Rome got sacked. Okay, Cicero, in his Republic, Book 2, he says, the two factors which, above all others, ensure that states will last are namely religion and humane behavior. Okay? So, we see that in Rome, okay, religion, the worship of the gods was closely tied, okay, to the well-being of the state as well. Okay? And when they later had the emperor, okay, the emperor was initially given the role of the Pontifex Maximus. What does that mean? Chief priest, the chief pagan priest. Okay? The emperor of Rome. Okay? So that's the civic nature of classical paganism. We see that in the Greek city-states, we see that in the Roman Republic and the empire, how religion seen as not separable from the state, and the state has to honor the gods for its well-being. And another aspect of classical paganism is that they saw all good as in this life alone. Okay? In classical Greek thought, once you died, your soul slipped into Hades. Okay, you see that in Homer's epics, okay, in the Iliad and in the Odyssey. Death meant eternal darkness, hunger, thirst. If you've read the Odyssey, in Book 11, Book of the Dead, when Odysseus enters Hades, he sees the shades before him, those wraiths, those shadows, forever wandering, looking for a place to slake their thirst. Cold, dark, and never able to feel the touch of another human. As Odysseus sees his mother and he tries to embrace her 3 times, she slips out of his arms. Death was, as an author put it, the great unacceptability to the Greeks. There was no concept of faithful service to the gods being rewarded with an afterlife of a good that transcends the things of this world. There was no such concept. The only form of immortality that they could aspire to was an undying name. That the people you leave behind on earth, the people who come after you, will remember your name. You remember the name of Achilles, the great warrior, of Hector, of Aeneas, of Patroclus, of Sarpedon. You ask an ancient Greek, how do you live forever? He will tell you, that your name is remembered forever. But what about you? What about you yourself? There's nothing good. Your soul into Hades, eternal darkness and unending night. Again, in the Iliad, okay, Jove, okay, in this translation, Zeus is called Jove, okay, he's considering whether to save his son Sarpedon from Patroclus in battle because he's about to be killed. And the other gods actually tell him, "What words are these, O sovereign of the skies? Short is the date prescribed to mortal man. Shall Jove for one extend the narrow span, whose bounds were fixed before his race began? How many sons of gods foredoomed to death, before proud Ilion must resign their breath? Were thine exempt, debate would rise above, and murmuring powers condemn their partial Jove. Give the bold chief a glorious fate in fight, and when the ascending soul has winged her flight, let sleep and death convey by thy command the breathless body to his native land. His friends and people to his future praise, a marble tomb and pyramid shall raise, and lasting honors to his ashes give. His fame, 'tis all the dead can have, shall live." That is the hopelessness of ancient paganism. And we see that thinking in the pagan people of the Old Testament as well, as the psalmist says of the worldly people around him. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. That's all the form of immortality that the people of this world can ever aspire to. A name, a legacy. We are getting closer to the characterization of paganism. One last thing we see is the immanent nature of pagan religion. Okay? Immanent, not imminent as in coming soon, but immanent as in here, among us, in us, with us. In paganism, the gods were of this world. Okay? We see that in Romans 1 already, right? Where Paul says that the people changed the truth of God into a lie and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Okay? Historian Robin Lane Fox, talking about the classical world, okay? These gods and heroes were not simply up in heaven, enjoying the muses gloating over human suffering. Greek life was lived with a sense of their potential presence in the clamor of storms or the stresses of sickness, in the dust clouds of battle or the distant hillsides, especially in the midday sun. And another quote from Robert Wilken in his book, The Christians as the Romans Saw Them. God, in the Greek view, dwelt in a region above the earth, but he did not stand outside of the world, the cosmos. Earth and heaven are parts of the same cosmos which has existed eternally. The world is not the creation of a transcendent God. Right? That is the pagan view of the relation between God and the world. Okay? You have gods in paganism for all sorts of various worldly domains. Okay? Why did I put these particular domains here? See, it's very random. Okay? Because these are specific gods. Okay? Fertility, Baal. Rain, also Baal. Sun, Helios. War, you have Mars or Ares. The sea, you have Poseidon. Storms, Zeus. Fortune, Fortuna. Wine, Dionysius. Okay? Gods for all these various domains. Okay? Augustine in his City of God actually poked fun at the pagans because when you sow your field and have it wait for it to grow, right? You actually need a whole retinue of gods to help you. You know, like the god of rain, the god of grain, the god of fertility, this god, that god, all different aspects of growing your crops, right? You need a god for everything. Okay? But the important thing here is that these gods, okay, were not just gods who ruled these domains. They were sometimes seen as the very personification of that domain. That Dionysus is wine. That Zeus is the storm. This immanent nature of the gods can also be seen in the Old Testament in a pretty amusing story. Okay? So in this context is that Israel, the northern kingdom, is fighting against Syria. Okay? And they were beaten in a hill country. And then the gods, or rather the servants of the king of Syria are telling him, the servants of the king of Syria said unto him, their gods are gods of the hills. Therefore they were stronger than we, but let us fight them in the plain, and surely we shall be stronger than they. Okay? This sort of reasoning was par for the course in ancient paganism. Right? The God is the God of the hills, you're not God of the valleys or the God of the plains, so we go and fight you elsewhere and we will win. Okay? But of course, they lost in the plains as well, because Jehovah God is not just the God of the hills. Okay? So, we come towards a characterization of the true nature of paganism. It is not essentially defined by polytheism. Let me just say this by way of remark. Okay? The problem between paganism and Christians was not polytheism versus monotheism. Okay? The pagans had no problem with monotheism because, you see, Zeus was the highest of the gods. Okay? So we could always say, yeah, monotheism of Zeus because he's the highest of all the gods. He's the strongest. Okay? None of the gods can actually resist him. So yeah, he had no problem with monotheism. Okay? So what is paganism really if it's not polytheism? Okay? What we have seen earlier, okay, that paganism is focused on this world's good. This world and this life. And secondly, pagan religion has an immanent nature. Okay, we shall explore that a bit more. It has an immanent nature, okay, not transcendent. Okay, the gods are of this world, here with us. Okay? And so, okay, I submit to you that paganism should not be understood as a matter of ritual worship, but as a matter of a particular religious orientation. And this is an orientation with respect to where the sacred is located. Okay? What I mean by sacred. Okay? Sacred are matters of ultimate concern, matters that are inviolable, and the source of all meaning and identity. Okay? So, what is this pagan orientation? The pagan orientation is an orientation that locates the sacred in this world and in this life. All that is good is found here, in this world and in this life, before we give our last breath. Christianity and Judaism, on the other hand, located the sacred outside of this world. They are, as we will see later, transcendent. They locate the sacred, or rather, they have a transcendent sacred order. Okay? Their orientation is transcendent. It is this difference in orientation that has profound implications when the pagan world and Christianity came into conflict. Okay? Stephen Smith writes, pagan religion locates the sacred within this world. In that way, paganism can consecrate the world from within. It is religiosity relative to an immanent sacred. Judaism and Christianity, by contrast, reflect a transcendent religiosity. They place the sacred ultimately outside the world, beyond time and space. He continues to write, for pagans, in sum, this city and this world were and are our home, the only home we have. This life and the good things of this life are the only ones we need to concern ourselves with. The pagan orientation, in short, accepts this world as our home and does so joyously, exuberantly, worshipfully. If you are connecting this with the worldliness we see today, I'm telling you, you are on absolutely the right track. For pagans, to be worldly and to be religious is one and the same. Because their religion is of this world. But what about the Christian orientation? Okay. Unlike the immanent sacred order of paganism, Christianity had a transcendent sacred order. It is God who stands apart from everything, from this world, from time and space. He is the one who has created all, and therefore He is the source of all sacredness. He is the source of all meaning. Everything that pagans held sacred, nature, sex, as you'll see, okay? Everything that pagans saw that divinity bound up in these things, sacredness bound up in these things, Christians saw in the light of this transcendent order that God is the one who gives meaning to creation. God is the one who gives meaning to human life. God is the one who gives meaning to human sexuality. God is the one who gives meaning to the state. Christians saw all that in the light of the transcendent Christian order. And the profound ethical implications that flowed from this transcendent order came into conflict with the pagans, not just in a way that they found it disagreeable, but they found it incomprehensible. One prominent example, okay? An example of how the Christian religion changed the face of the West. Sexual activity was a prominent feature in pagan worship. Okay? Particularly the temple prostitution, which we see also in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Okay? Why? Right? Because of the logic of the gods, right, being of this world, okay, they developed this logic of rituals that in order to get something happening in the divine, we mimic that thing in earthly reality. And then it's like, oh, the rain isn't falling, we have no fertility for our crops, right? What we need to do, right? Oh, we know that fertility, right, comes from the sexual intercourse, and so if we have we get the god and the goddess to have sexual intercourse through our ritual intercourse here on earth, we get the fertility from the gods. So this was actually the logic. This is actually the logic of the ritual, the pagan rituals in order to control the divine. Okay, and particularly in Rome, actually also a lot in ancient Greece, right? There was a very large degree of sexual freedom, okay, for men. Okay, sex was just something they did. Okay, you did it to women, you did it to men, you did it to boys. Okay, and for them, their sexual activity was a kind of religious performance, seen as a channel of divine power. Okay. Smith writes, in the Roman Empire, sexual morality reflected two broad premises. Okay, we'll just look at the first one. First, sexual fulfillment is not only natural and pleasurable and presumptively acceptable, it is also a kind of ecstatic religious performance. Peter Brown writes in his book, The Body and Society, the men we meet in the 2nd century still belong to the rustling universe of late classical polytheism. They knew that they had been knit by the cunning of the gods to the animal world. They felt pulsing in their own bodies the same fiery spirit that covered the hills every year with newborn lambs and that ripened the crops in seasonal love play as the spring winds embraced the fertile ears. Above them, the same fire glowed in the twinkling stars. Their bodies and their sexual drives shared directly in the unshakable perpetuity of an immense universe through which the gods played exuberantly. That was how they viewed sexual activity in ancient Rome and Greece. But what about the Christian sexual ethic? Paul writes, the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Flee fornication. In the Christian worldview, sex had an ethical dimension to it, and it was determined by the creator of humans, the creator who has created humans as sexual beings, supplied sex with a meaning and with rules. And fundamentally, this challenged the pagan conceptions, not just of sex, but of human persons and their relation to the world as a whole. And so to their mind, the Christian sexual ethic was not just offensive, it was utterly incomprehensible. What do you mean by that? Okay, the Romans will be asking the Christians, right? And even in the times when Christianity was the norm, when they had a so-called Christian society, right, there are echoes of voices of desire to return to the pagan past and say that Christianity turned the lights out on this party that they were having. Okay. So this is paganism, right, according to the study by Stephen Smith, right, the location of the sacred in this world. I'm going to bring in another angle on paganism that I think is essentially quite the same, right? But also another perspective on it that is very useful for us. Okay, and this is from the work of Peter Jones, pastor and theologian. Okay, so Peter Jones sees paganism as a worldview that sees all as one. Okay, he has boiled down his entire argument into 1 versus 2. Okay, he says there are only two kinds of people in this world: those who worship the Creator and those who worship creation. Okay, those who worship the Creator will see a distinction between Creator and creature. Those who worship the creature will see all as one. Okay, he writes, okay, the only two fundamental patterns of belief that underlie how we make sense of the world are called oneism and twoism. That's his term. Those words don't actually exist. These terms are my shorthand for what I believe the Apostle Paul is getting at when he describes the heart of idolatry and falsehood as exchanging the truth for the lie and exchanging worship of the Creator for worship of the creature. Okay? He continues, how do these simple terms describe spirituality? Peter Occhiogrosso gives us a hint in his book, The Joy of Sects, a work that discusses all major religions. While he does not use one or two in his title, he nevertheless boldly states, under and through each of the great traditions runs a single stream that feeds each of these traditions from a single source, the perennial philosophy. He defines the perennial philosophy as a system that seeks to break down the duality or two-ness and return us to the unitive condition, oneness, to see that we are already one. Okay? So this is Peter Jones' view of paganism. Paganism sees everything as one unitive whole. Okay? You will see later how it actually relates to the earlier conception of paganism. Okay? The Genesis cosmology, the creation account, right, has been noted by scholars of the ancient Near East to be a polemic against the pagan worldviews and the pagan creation myths of how the world came to be. In a lot of these myths, right, the world, right, is just an emanation from a god. It's actually part of the God himself. Right? In many of these creation myths. Therefore, the God and the world are not independent. But Genesis presents God, the Creator, as completely separate, transcendent, independent of creation. He stood over above the world. He can exist without the world. He created the world. He is creator of the world. He is above it, transcendent, independent of it. However, pagan myth saw all: humanity, nature, the rocks and the trees, the animals, the beasts of the field, and divinity, the gods, all as one. Okay? John Oswald writes in the Bible Among the Myths, there is a community of essence among the various elements, and each segment partakes of the other two. So gods are humans and natural forces. Nature is divine, and divinity has human-like characteristics. Humanity is divine and is one with nature. There is no distinction in nature among the three, only one in roles. Okay? And this pagan onist worldview, right, has no use for distinctions and boundaries. And we see that in many practices in pagan ritual. Okay, crossing of sexual boundaries. Okay, there's lots of homosexuality, bestiality, incest, polygamy. There's a lot of androgyny in how the gods are portrayed. Okay? However, out of the Christian worldview, we have a basic creator-creature distinction, okay, that out of which comes all distinctions. We distinguish creator and creature at a fundamental level, and then we distinguish man as made in the image of God and nature. We distinguish male and female. We distinguish truth and falsehood. We distinguish good and evil, and so on. Okay. So, that's the other angle on paganism, seeing all as one, versus the Christian view of seeing coming from a creator-creature distinction and everything flowing from that. So, if paganism is understood as that, and not necessarily literally sacrificing bulls to Zeus, okay, has paganism actually returned? Okay, was paganism banished only to come back in a different form? I would say, in a way, paganism was never truly gone. Paganism was never truly gone. Okay, Christianity's transcendent sacred order, okay, shaped Western thought and the modern world as it triumphed in the West. But paganism roosted beneath its canopy. Okay? Think of a beautiful cathedral. Think of a beautiful cathedral. Okay? On the outside, it looks exactly like a cathedral. Okay? There's a cross, there's the arches, okay? And it points upward to the God who sits, right, above, transcendent. But we enter the cathedral, and inside are all sorts of symbols of worldliness, right? Think of, casino, slot machines, what have you, okay? That was what the Western world was like. Of course, there were some inside, even under that canopy, who were genuinely transformed by the renewing of their mind into a transcendent sacred order. But that was the reality. Paganism roosted beneath that canopy. And this immanent sacred order cannot abide the suppression of the Christian canopy. Even in a Christianized society, the hearts of men remain corrupt, sinful, and worldly. You see also the worldliness in your own hearts, even, right, as you are running this Christian race. We see that in paganized forms of Christianity, having patron saints for all sorts of domains. Okay, having the religion turned into something that is very worldly, very commodified, very formulaic, ritualistic. Okay, and there are even writers, even while society is supposedly Christian, who express resentment of the Christian sexual ethic, who look back on the classical pagan past with admiration, and who desire to go back to there. Okay? And now, we see that the canopy has been blown open. Okay, remember my cathedral? Imagine a typhoon has just come and it just ripped the roof off, collapsed one of the walls, and we see what's inside for what it is. Okay? With movements such as the Enlightenment, okay, sexual revolution, okay, and the rise of secularism, although, as I said, it's not truly religiously neutral. Okay? It is not supplanting Christianity with no religion, but it is really supplanting Christianity with a pagan religious orientation. And how does modern paganism express itself? I just listed what I could think of. Expressions of an immanent sacredness or oneism, okay? Sexual licentiousness, materialism, atheism, moral relativism, abortion, socialism, homosexuality, transgenderism, New Age movement or New Age spirituality, environmentalism, neo-paganism, and so on. Okay, I'll just pick up a few of these. Okay, now the first area, the LGBTQ one, is something that for this topic I really recommend you read Carl Trueman's The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. He really explains the movements, the intellectual movements behind what we see today, and he unpacks a lot the psychology of their reaction and the rhetoric. Okay, so how is the LGBTQ movement a form of modern paganism? They locate their sacredness in self-identity, particularly their sexual identity. Okay, this is something that Trueman covers in his work. Okay, so you hold your own identity as sacred, your expression of your identity as sacred. Okay? Abortion, okay? Locating the sacredness in bodily autonomy, this concept, in free sexual expression, okay? And the things of this world at the expense of the life of the child. New Age spirituality, okay? All is one. That's literally what the New Agers will say. Everything is one. All is one. Literally what Peter Jones was talking about. Okay? Environmentalism, okay? The modern environmental movement. In fact, I think modern environmentalism is the closest we come to classical paganism. Okay? Locating sacredness in nature, destroying distinctions between man and nature, okay? Seeing nature and humanity as one. Okay? That's environmentalism. It is pagan. Now, immanent sacred order, transcendent sacred order. They had conflict then in the Roman world, and there will be conflict today. Okay. The current cultural conflict, okay, is in many ways a conflict between those two sacred orders. Between one that sees this world and this life in the light of God and one that does not. Okay? And what happens when these two orders clash? They not only find the other abhorrent and disagreeable, but utterly incomprehensible. They cannot understand each other. Okay? And some of the persecution that results, okay, it can seem irrational even to outside or so-called neutral observers. Because it can seem irrational. Okay? Stephen Smith writes in his book, okay, Douglas Laycock is an agnostic, libertarian law professor who has been called the preeminent lawyer scholar of religious freedom over the last quarter century. And he raises a timely question that has surely occurred to others as well. Commenting on recent cases in which same-sex couples have sued marriage counselors or photographers or florists or other professionals who have objected on religious grounds to assisting with same-sex unions, Laycock observes that in most such cases, these professional services are readily available from other counselors or providers who do not have any such objection. Moreover, he suggests no sensible same-sex couple would actually want the services of, say, a counselor who is religiously opposed to their union. Why then do these parties insist on suing people whose services they neither need nor want? Laycock presents the point I have just described not so much as a question, but more as an accusation. He says the plaintiffs in these cases are trying not to gain a needed remedy, but rather to drive traditionally religious professionals out of business. And he says the plaintiffs are doing this because they are intolerant. One of the ways in which this conflict has been approached to try to solve it, right, is by what I talked about earlier, neutral ground. Why don't we start from a common ground that we both agree on what is good, okay, what is valuable and morally worthy, and then we work, right, from there. Is there such a neutral ground? Okay? People like John Rawls, okay, these are people who suggested these things. Okay? Can we work from there and get somewhere? However, the difference in sacred orders means that such attempts will ultimately fall apart. Okay? Such attempts will ultimately fall apart. Okay? Because fundamentally, they have competing conceptions of what is good, what is valuable, what is the source of meaning. So, Douglas Laycock asks, why? In the modern day. In the ancient church, someone else was also asking why. Tertullian. In the midst of the Roman persecution of the ancient church, Tertullian was asking the same question. Why? Why are we being persecuted? Christians were good subjects of the empire. Okay? They weren't committing crimes. They weren't avoiding taxes. They were fighting in the military. They were fighting among the legions. They were good subjects of the empire. They were praying for the emperor even. And it might be even more puzzling to note that actually the Roman Empire had a reputation for very broad-minded religious toleration. Okay? What God you want to worship? Yeah, worship. Worship. You want to worship your God, we incorporate your God into our pantheon, then you worship your God, you can worship our gods also, Was it really a matter of pragmatism that they had this religious tolerance? Okay? Why was it that Christianity was special and they had to persecute it? There was actually a logic to the persecution. The fact is that the Romans did try to accommodate the Christians. They did. We will see how. And the Christians also offered their own terms of compromise. But their terms were mutually incomprehensible. Because of the difference in sacred order, it led to mutually incomprehensible terms of compromise. We will see the Romans' offer to the Christians first. What was the Romans' offer to the Christians? They said, you can worship Christ, but just let us incorporate Christ into our pantheon of gods, and you can now worship Christ along with all our gods. Right? We have our gods too, you have your God. Come, just let him join with our gods and let him join the company of Roman gods, and we can all pray to all our Roman gods together. What does this offer sound like to Christians? Okay? That's easy. Right? It sounds like you can worship Christ, just deny him by worshiping other gods. Okay? That doesn't make sense, right? Doesn't make sense to the Christians. They can't accept this. And y'all can understand why they can't accept this. The interesting thing is on the other side. Interesting thing is on the other side. Okay? I'm not going to show the next slide yet, because it shows the answer. But the Christians' offer to the Romans was, we will be obedient and loyal servants to the empire. Just let us worship Christ exclusively. Okay? We will serve the empire in anything they want us to do, okay, but just let us worship Christ exclusively. What do you think that sounded like to the Romans? if you had remembered what I said earlier about religion being so closely tied to the state, this is what it sounded like to the Romans. What the Christians' offer sounded like to the Romans was, we will be obedient and loyal servants to the empire, just let us subvert and undermine it. Utterly ridiculous, right? The Romans find that completely incomprehensible. What do you mean by that? Right? That you say you'll be loyal servants of the empire, but at the same time, you commit the act that is most destructive to the state. And that is not worshipping our gods. Okay. So, the terms of compromise were mutually incomprehensible. We bring it to the modern day, and the case of the same-sex couple who approached the Christian baker to ask him to bake a cake for their gay wedding. The same-sex couple says, okay, you don't have to be gay or give up your religion. We just want you to acknowledge our existence by helping us celebrate our self-expression of our sexual identity. What this sounds like to the Christian baker, okay, for the Christian baker, this means this is celebrating something that God finds abhorrent and rejecting the meaning of marriage given to it by the transcendent creator of marriage. We can't do that. But the same-sex couple does not understand that, because where do they come from? They come from expressive individualism, okay, a concept that Truman will tell you about in his book. Okay, that it is my sexual identity, okay, that's a matter of ultimate concern, and therefore the expression of it, right, is to be held sacred. Okay, marriage, right, is what we choose it to be, what we like, what we feel it to be. Okay, they do not understand, right, this idea of a transcendent creator giving a meaning to marriage. And on the other side, the Christian baker says, I personally cannot celebrate a same-sex wedding due to my religious convictions, but I am happy to serve you in any other way. You want to buy a cake for any other event? Can. You want to buy donuts and bagels? Can. Okay? But I cannot bake a cake for a gay wedding. To the same-sex couple, this is an assault on their very dignity. It is not saying, sorry, we can't do that. It is an assault on their personhood itself. Okay? It impinges on their self-expression of their identity. Okay? The Christian baker is essentially refusing to acknowledge their existence as human persons. Okay? This is actually borne out by the quotes when you read the news on these cases, right? They say that it made me feel less of a human being, right? They say that. Right, so this is why they react in such a way. I really recommend you all read Truman's book, okay? It really explains why the rhetoric is the way it is. Okay. Can the two sacred orders coexist peacefully? Okay? Christians and non-Christians, right, seem to coexist and cooperate peacefully most of the time. You all go to work, okay? Okay, most of you here don't work in church. Okay, you go to work, you have non-Christian colleagues, you have non-Christian bosses. Okay, you cooperate peacefully and effectively, right? However, this peaceful coexistence can be maintained only insofar as matters of sacred order are not involved. And this fundamental difference in worldview will ultimately lead, right, to conflict. The city is pagan. We live in the pagan city. Will they let the transcendent sacred order remain within them? Will they live and let live? That was the hope. But if you think that is still on the table, I'm sorry to say that the pagan city is in no accommodating mood. The pagan city will seek to push out all remnants of a transcendent sacred order because darkness hates the light. It cannot abide any quarter or enclave of transcendent sacredness, and faithful expressions of Christianity will be met with hostility and persecution. They will push it completely out of the public square, and if they could, they will push into the private sphere as well. They will not leave us alone, even if we are determined to leave them alone. What we should do, okay? This session is not a playbook, okay? Not a comprehensive strategy for the cultural war, but we have to correctly diagnose what it is we are up against. Remember from what we have been saved. We have been pagans too. We have the remnants of pagan orientation within us as well. Right? Seeing good, right? Seeing ultimate good in this world. We have these tendencies too, don't we? It is only by God's grace that we have been saved from this pagan orientation, and only by God's grace can pagans turn from creature worship to worship the Creator. So give bold witness to the gospel, which is their only hope, our only hope, and this world's only hope. The conflict, I believe, will never truly be won, will never be completely won by either side in this world. There will be times of ascendancy of one side over the other, but the conflict will always be there until the Lord returns. Some further applications, what I want all of us to take away. Reflect on whether you are living with a pagan or a Christian worldview. Okay? Recognize that cultural conflict is inevitable if we are living faithfully as Christians. If we hardly see any of these cultural conflicts here in Singapore, what does that tell us? Learn to develop worldview sensitivity. Okay? Many of us look at issues at a very surface level. Okay? But you pry apart the arguments, you will see the kinds of metaphysical commitments that they have beneath these premises, right? Things about sexual identity, self-expression, sacredness in nature or in humanity, right? Learn to develop sensitivity to worldview. Learn to see how worldview affects how we think. Learn to see how worldview should affect how we think in all areas of life. Commit to bold, faithful witness for Christ in all cultural battlegrounds. Okay. Whether it's human sexuality, abortion, issues that people avoid because they are political. Right. Many of these issues are really religious at the root. Okay. I recognize that pagan culture will not leave us alone, even if we leave them alone.